One of the key plot points, structures of the plot to Philip K. Dick's novel Ubik is the assembly of a team of inertials. Now, inertials are talents, they balance out psionic talents, they are anti-psionic talents. So they're usually balancing out things like telepathy or precognition, but there's some others as well that we'll mention very briefly in just a bit. And why is this team being assembled? So Runciter has a new client who turns out to be Stanton Mick, perhaps not actually Stanton Mick, as we'll find out. And they're supposed to go to the moon and take care of the telepath and perhaps precog problem that Mick is encountering. It appears that Ray Hollis's organization has infiltrated Mick's, and so Runciter Associates is going to step up. So Runciter is assembling a team, and Mick says, well, we want 11 people, actually through his intermediary, Miss Hurt. And so they're going to put 14 people onto Runciter's private spaceship, Runciter himself, Miss Hurt, Joe Chip, and then the 11 counter talents. And we learn that this is an 11-person team. So 4 of them are anti-precogs, as we learn. 4 of them are anti-telepaths, including one who's very, very powerful. And then we have an anti-animator, so that keeps people from being brought back to life, we assume. And then an anti-perikineticist. So perikinesis is moving things by your mind. And it's going to turn out that doesn't play any role here. And then we've got one unknown, and that is the character Pat Conley, who is tested by Joe Chip in the earlier chapters. She becomes his mistress. Actually, sort of, he's kind of a kept guy because she's actually got some money. And her parents work for Ray Hollis, and nobody's quite sure, including maybe herself, how her talent actually works. But it's clear that it does. So this team is going to be assembled, and we learn a bit about each of them. We start out in the beginning of this chapter where the team is being assembled, brought together, chapter 5, with Tippy Jackson having a dream that we'll come back to in just a moment. And then we're introduced to Edie Dorn, Francesca Spanish, who's, a bit psychotic, takes drugs, Al Hammond, who's going to be a major character, sort of like a second in command with Joe Chip, but unfortunately will die off about halfway through the novel. Tito Apostos, John Ild, Don Denny, who will be there, at least we think, all the way to the end of the novel. Sammy Mundo, and he is actually deserving of reading a little bit about him. He's very, very powerful, but he's also a bit unusual. Technically, Mundo had the intelligence of a raccoon. He could walk, eat, bathe himself, even after a fashion talk. His anti-telepathic ability, however, was considerable. Once alone, he'd blanked out Estol Melopone. The firm's house magazine had rambled on about it for months afterwards. Melopone is like the premier telepath, right? He's like, takes 3 to count him out. And then we have Wendy Wright. Now, we should also read a little bit about Wendy Wright. We don't have to go through the whole description because I think you'll get the point fairly quickly. As always, when the opportunity arose, Joe took a long, astute look at the girl whom, if he could have managed it, he would have had as his mistress or even better, his wife. It did not seem possible that Wendy Wright had been born out of blood and internal organs like other people. In proximity to her, he felt himself to be a squat, oily, sweating, uneducated nerd whose stomach rattled and whose breath wheezed. Near her, he became aware of the physical mechanisms that kept him alive. Within him, machinery, pipes and valves and gas compressors and fan belts had to chug away at a losing task, a labor ultimately doomed. Seeing his face, he discovered his own consisted of a garish mask, right? So she's, a looker, we could say. And Joe is clearly infatuated with her. And as a matter of fact, there will be a moment where she is either sent or chooses to go to his hotel room after he assumes command. Then we have Fred Zafsky, and then we have Pat Conley, this enigmatic talent. So that's the team, right? And Runciter says, you know, we got to be prepared for any possibility. I mean, maybe we could get rid of the anti-animator, but I don't know. We got to cover all of our bets. So they go up to the moon and they are ambushed there. And we think that Runciter dies. Now, there is this shared dream that they talk about. So we learn about it first at the very beginning of chapter 5, and then we find out that Joe really should have been paying attention to what people were saying in that first meeting, because we read here, a throng of precogs and telepaths descended from a ladder, spun of the finest natural hemp to the balcony outside my window. They dissolved a passageway through the wall and manifested themselves around my bed, waking me up with their chatter. They quoted poetry and languid prose from old-time books which delighted me. They seemed so sparkling. One of them, who called himself Bill, "Wait a minute," Tito Aposto said, "I had a dream like that too. Remember, Joe, I told you just before we left Earth?" And then Tippy Jackson says, "Yes, I dreamed that too. Bill and Matt, they said they were going to get me." And Runciter says, "Oh, you should have told me, Joe." And Joe's like, "Well, you know, I probably should have, but I didn't." And it's going to turn out maybe they were grasping that there was going to be this attack. After the attack, chapter 7, we find that Joe is left in charge, and he is talking with Al, who's now sort of his second in command, and they have to figure out what to do. Whether they can get rid of Pat Conley because they think that she's going to be a problem there. They have an interesting discussion about whether Joe has a will to succeed or a will to fail. And then we get several different passages where the team of Inertials are together, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. So the first one is around this conference table, and Al Hammond says Joe should be back anytime now. So they presumably have all 11 of them there. Meanwhile, Pat says, "I suggest we watch the late afternoon news on TV to see if Hollis has leaked the news of Runciter's death." And they are, looking at the TV, and it needs a coin, because as we know, almost everything takes a coin to operate. And they realize that there's a lot of things that aren't adding up. They put together a list: stale cigarettes, out-of-date phone book, obsolete money, putrefied food, add-on match holder. Al says, "I'm going to pass this list around the table one more time and see if this time anyone can spot a connective link between these 5 occurrences," or whatever you want to call them, these 5 things that are wrong, John Ild said. Pat Conley said, "It's easy to see the connective between the first 4, but not the match folder." And so they're thinking about all of this sort of stuff together. Joe is going to eventually show up, and they're going to begin talking about what's going on here. It seems like there's this process of entropy or decay going on, but it also seems like there's another process which is different. Runciter is showing up in coins and bills and matchbooks. So what's happening? Later on, chapter 11, the team is back together again. Joe gets out to Des Moines, where all of them are at Runciter's services, the memorial at the mortuary in Des Moines, where Runciter is from, and they're talking about how things are breaking down there. Mr. Chip Edie Dorn said agitatedly, "Since we came here to this place, this town has radically changed. None of us understand it. Do you see what we see?" "I'm not sure," Joe said. "What is it you see?" "Come on, Chip. Tito Apostos said with anger. Don't mess around. Simply tell us for Christ's sakes what this place looks like to you. That vehicle, you arrived in that. Tell us what that is. Tell us what you arrived in. Mr. Chip, Sammy Mundo stammered, that's a real old automobile. That's what it is, right? How old is it exactly? He giggled. Now, a little bit of foreshadowing here. Sammy Mundo is supposed to be pretty, unintelligent. But that doesn't sound all that unintelligent, does it? So we'll come back to that at a different point. And they figure out that they are kind of going backwards in time, that things are regressing. Joe says, reality has receded. It's lost its underlying support and ebbed back to previous forms that took 53 years ago. And they're trying to figure out what's actually going on. And this is where Francie brings up a dream about Ubik, right? This hand that comes down and it has an aerosol spray can in it. So that's an interesting thing to happen. The mystery is revealed when we get to chapter 14, and it turns out that all of them are actually dead, which is what Runciter has been telling them through his manifestations. So Runciter is going to say that I'm the only one who actually survived, me and Miss Wirt, and all the rest of you died in the blast. And so Joe says, are you sure that you're the only one who survived the blast? And he says, of us, for example, Pat Conley. And he says, well, Pat Conley's chest was crushed. She died of shock and a collapsed lung with multiple internal injuries, including a damaged liver and a leg broken in 3 places. Physically speaking, she's about 4 feet away from you. Her body, I mean. And it's the same for all the rest. They're all here in Cold Pack at the beloved Brethren Moratorium, with one exception. Sammy Mundo. He suffered massive brain damage and lapsed into a coma out of which they say he'll never emerge. The cortical, and then Joe says, then he's alive. He's not in Cold Pack. He's not here. And Runciter says, well, I wouldn't call it alive. They've run encephalograms on him. No cortical activity at all. A vegetable. Nothing more. No personality. No motion. No consciousness. There's nothing happening in Mundo's brain. Nothing in the slightest. So they're all in half-life. And they're all dying off. And we find out why in chapter 15, when Jory is finally revealed as the, essentially, monster that he is. So Joe asks Jory, when he's been revealed by Ubik, where's Denny? He never came into this room, did he? And Jory says, I ate Denny a long time ago. Right at the beginning, before they came here from New York. First, I ate Wendy Wright. Denny came second. And Joe says, how do you mean ate? And Jory said, I did what I do. It's hard to explain, but I've been doing it for a long time to lots of half-life people. I eat their life, what remains of it. There's very little in each person, so I need a lot of them. I used to wait until they'd been in half-life a while. Now I have to have them immediately if I'm going to be able to live myself. If you come close to me and listen, I'll hold my mouth open. Then you can hear their voices. Not all of them, but anyhow, the last ones I ate, the ones you know. And he says, don't you have anything to say? And Joe says, it was you who started me dying down there in the elevator. And Jory says, yeah, me, not Pat. I ate her in the hall by the elevator. Then I ate the others. I thought you were dead. And so only Joe and Jory are left. All the rest of the team, the entire team of Inertials, all gone. Snuffed out in half-life, where they could have continued on for years and years and years by this malevolent creature, Jory. Runciter tried to save them, but he was unable to save anybody except for Joe. And that's the end of this team and their mission. This team of 11 Inertials assembled from Runciter Associates and sent up to the moon for a special job that turns out to be an ambush, and the end of all of their lives.